Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for the first webinar of Dan's 2021 series. My name is Brian Harper. I'm the Director of Communications here at Divers Alert Network, and we're really glad to have you here with us this evening. Let us know where you're tuning in from. Post in the YouTube live chat. Let us know what dive shop you're with or what dive club you're with. We'd love to know who's tuning in and where you are. This afternoon, this evening, it is my pleasure to introduce Francois Burman. Francois is going to be speaking about emergency planning. There will be a question and answer session at the end of the presentation, so please stick around for that. And also, please post your questions in the chat. We'll go through as those questions are posted. You can save them for the end. You can post them in real time as they come to you. We'll go through the chat and ask those questions to Francois at the end of the presentation. But I want to tell you more about our speaker this evening. Francois Burman is the Director of Risk Mitigation at DAN. He is responsible for all DAN's safety and accident prevention initiatives, as well as the Recompression Chamber Network. He has traveled around the world to conduct safety assessments at facilities used to treat injured divers and has written 2 books, the Risk Assessment Guide for Dive Operators and Professionals and the Risk Assessment Guide for Recompression Facilities. And tonight, he will be speaking to us about emergency planning. Who is responsible for your safety? I'll turn it over to you, Francois.
Thank you, Brian, and good evening or good day, depends where you are around the world. Welcome to our webinar, and this evening, I'd like to start by saying, when you go on a dive trip, the one thing you don't want to expect is going to be an emergency. However, emergencies happen. It's just a fact of life. And what we really want to do is to be prepared for an emergency and be able to deal with things without panicking, knowing what we're going to do next, and hopefully enable ourselves to prevent the amount of damage or harm that can come to us. And while we rely on the dive operator, the hotel, the dive professional, the boat captain, to be prepared and ready to assist us if something goes wrong, the question I pose to you is, who is actually responsible for your safety? Is it only them, or do you have part of responsibility? And that's really what we would like to get to, for you to accept this as part of your dive trip, the part of the risks that we accept, and to prepare you to be able to deal with these things. So firstly, what's all the fuss about? Why are we particularly concerned about emergencies? Well, accidents do happen, and you've heard the horror stories, you've seen the pictures, boats that burn, rebreather systems that burn, explosions that happen, people get burnt. And really what we want to look back at, and for you to get some confidence in this, is how did the dive operator or the dive professional respond? What did the boat captain do? And can we always rely only on them? You know, are they always around? Maybe they're the ones that are injured and then we lose the person that really knows what's going on. Now, some of you might say, well, you know, if they do that, I'm going to sue them. You can't sue them if you're dead. And besides that, if you are badly injured, fine, go and sue somebody. But if you could prevent that from happening in the first place, so much the better. So it's really all about being prepared. And being prepared means knowing what types of emergencies you might need to face, then how to plan for them. And in that means, what are you going to do when something goes wrong? But if you do all of this, then you will essentially be planning not to have an emergency because you understand what are the things that could happen. And then lastly, remember the great dive trip, we're going to some remote area, we're very far from home, and all the usual things that we can rely on are not going to be in place. So let's have a look at what are the typical emergencies that we might face. And we break these into travel and diving, so not just the in-water things that we're used to. And we say to ourselves, well, what can possibly go wrong? Okay, so we'll divide this up into medical emergencies, which we'll further divide up into your own health issues. So you get some illness while you're traveling, or your pre-existing health conditions manifest in such a way that, you know, that's kind of the end of your trip, and what are you now going to do? So that's really in terms of your health. Diving accidents, well, that's something we've discussed at length. We know that you can get decompression sickness, you can suffer trauma. We've spoken about boat propeller injuries and tanks falling on people's feet, and clearly we can drown, and we don't want to end up in that situation. But let's not just focus on issues that are related to the dive. You can get injured in a motor vehicle accident. You can suffer some form of trauma in the hotel. You fall down the stairs. Or there's a fire somewhere else and you get burnt, not on the boat, but where you're staying or in a motor vehicle or wherever it might be. So those are the things that affect us from a medical point of view. But that's not all that happens to us. And we've seen all of these items that we're going to go through now have happened to divers. We've had to face them. We have, loss of equipment and obviously injury. But let's just look at what can happen outside of the typical medical emergencies. So we get equipment rupture. Perhaps it happens underwater, as we've had with the hoses that have failed. Perhaps you're in a motor vehicle accident, never mind injury, but you're driving a vehicle in a foreign country. How are you going to deal with the aftermath of that? They get into your hotel room or your Airbnb room and they steal all your documents. And now you're stuck in a foreign place with no means of actually getting out. What about assault? It happens, especially when we've been out late night at a bar, going home, and we're on the wrong side of town, or you get arrested, where you don't speak the language. You might not be guilty, but how do we deal with that? Then the fires in the hotel or wherever we are can also destroy our belongings, our laptop computer, our passports, our funds that we've taken with us. We can get lost at sea. Okay, we should be prepared for that one because, certainly as Dan, we talk about how to make sure that if you do drift away from the boat, people can see you. But you go walking in a foreign place and you get lost. Hopefully you have your cell phone on you, but cell phones don't always work. Then you might have local security concerns, civil unrest and strife and things that no one was expecting, but these things happen. And we've seen divers being hijacked and being kidnapped. And then lastly, what about customs and immigration issues? You arrive in the country, they don't like your papers or they seize your dive equipment. How are we going to deal with that? We maybe have a bit of time, but first thing that might happen is you go into panic mode. Okay, so we really want to share with you that there's more than just an in-water injury, and one needs to be at least aware of what are we going to do if something like this happens. So let's go to the site where we're going to be diving or where we're going to be vacationing. And let's have a look at the typical gaps, the things that are not in place that we really do need to rely on. So the first thing I'd like to bring up is when we arrive there, how prepared is the dive operator, the boat or the hotel? Do they look like they know what they're doing? Are they certified? Are they trained? You might say, well, how do we find out? Look for the certificates on the wall or even ask the question. And a real key to all of this is, do they brief you properly? We have pre-dive briefings, okay? Sometimes they are less strict than in other places. Sometimes the instructor shows you that they're really concerned about your health. But what about being on a boat? Do they brief you about where the fire exits are, where the fire extinguishers are? What are you going to do below decks if there's a fire on the boat? And that's just one example. Do they have the necessary emergency equipment that they might need, that you might need? Fine, if they've got it, but where's it located? What sort of condition is it in? Because we've opened a first aid kit and an oxygen kit to find that there's nothing there that's going to work. Then another important one is how aware are they of your health? Are they and your welfare? Do they have lookouts on the boat? And again, I'm hesitating on the one about fires on boats because it's very unfortunate. It certainly doesn't happen very frequently. However, we've seen that part of the reason for the devastation, loss of life, is no fire watch. And are they concerned about people's health? People getting out the water, they don't feel very well. DCS, we kind of are tuned into that, but there are other things that people might suffer. And ultimately, do you feel confident that they've got your health and safety in their hands and they are really tuned in to making sure that you have a safe experience with them? And that's not just in the boat, not just in the dive site, but wherever else you happen to be on your vacation. So we get fires, not just on boats, we get hotels that burn and houses that burn and motor vehicles that burn. And of course, again, what you probably want to do from your side is to say, okay, I'm going on a boat. The cabin is on the second deck from the top. So I'm in a really confined space. Does the boat look like it's kept up to date? Are there fire monitors, fire extinguishers, carbon dioxide detectors? How do they store their flammable materials? Something, that again, we might not think about, but what might trigger a thought for you is have a look where the lithium-ion batteries are being charged for the cameras and the scooters. And if you see a mess of cables, really no control, well, that's a warning sign to you that you need to be prepared. Do they have fire extinguishers? Do you know how to use them? And the one that we were concerned about at the last devastating fire was there was no ways for people below the deck to breathe when there was smoke and they couldn't find their way out. The fire exits, do you know where they are? Are they going to be suitable if there's smoke in the room? And then where are you going to all get together once it's all done, that we know that this is the muster point and everybody's been accounted for? What else? What are the other issues we might be concerned about? So have a look at their filling station. What does the compressor area look like? What is where's the air intake located? So what is the possibility of contamination? Why do I say that to you? Because in the last 6 months, we've had 2 reports, significant injuries where clear contamination in the cylinder, which came from the surrounding area. And if this is of concern for you, well, then what's the quality of the gas going to be? And you can see pictures of handheld monitors that are really easy things to carry with you. Some divers do that automatically. Other divers assume that that's going to be taken care of. Perhaps when you're considering where you're going to go diving, what the location is like, these are prompts that you might have to, maybe I should take one with me. How far are you going to be from help? In a really remote area, 911 is not going to work. The dive operator knows that. They'll share with you that we're a long way from help. And again, one wants to be prepared. Sure, you're going to put your life and your safety in their hands, but this is a combined process. It's not just them. And then, of course, your personal security if you go to some of these remote locations. And I keep saying remote locations because this is typically where these issues arise. But hey, it could happen anywhere. And then you have your plan in place. I'm going to leave it to the dive operator. They seem to know what they're doing. Great. And if that plan doesn't work, if the instructor or the dive master or someone else is injured, what is plan B? Then ask yourself, are you in any position to help those around you that might be in need? And vice versa, will they be able to help you? And it's not just giving first aid, but what about being able to contact, your people back at home or getting, somebody else to assist you because, each one of us has our own unique requirement situations, and they need to know, does this person have health issues? You go with your buddy or with anybody else, I'm somebody that has these health issues, so if something happens when you get out the water, they're kind of prepared for that. And then once you've kind of got things in place, you need to check, have I covered all the bases? And again, I'm giving you a really detailed review. These things don't happen, and each one of these is not going to occur collectively. What I'm trying to help you to get to a point is where you open your mind to what are the things that could happen when I go to some of these really great places. And most of all, if you're in doubt, then ask. Ask the dive operator, ask the people that are doing the bookings for you. Just make sure that you are prepared, you have the contact numbers, and you know kind of what you're going to do if something goes wrong. And I'm going to get at the end of this presentation to a tool that I'm going to give to you and show you how it works. It's on our website. I'm hoping that just going through the process of looking at this tool and what it will prompt us to do will open your eyes and make you aware of that extra bit of preparedness that you can take with you on your trip. But let's have a look at some of the things that you might want to consider. And again, we want to travel prepared. We don't want to end up on our trip realizing, dash, I should have taken something else with me. Okay, so we talk about first aid kits. Good thing to have, especially when you're not going to be with a dive operator. You might be in your hotel, you might be traveling around somewhere, and you need something. And remember to include your own medications, put that on your checklist. They might be unique to you, and perhaps in the area we're going to, if you lose your medications, it might not be that easy to get your prescription refilled. Then some of the safety equipment you might want to think about, and we're coming back to this recurring theme, but this recurring theme kind of made us open our eyes and made us aware that things don't always turn out as they should turn out. And some of our colleagues, I know at least one of my colleagues that's a very experienced diver, and he said to me, you know what, when I go traveling on liveaboards now, I take my own carbon monoxide monitor with me. In fact, he takes one of these domestic units with him that actually pick up smoke as well as carbon monoxide. They're really easy to carry with you. It should kind of be part of your standard, unless you know that the boat is really well fitted out with these things, something that you might want to consider. Perhaps a breathing mask, one of these things that you can pull over your head, and no matter where you're stuck, as long as you're clearly not damaged by the fire, you're not going to be debilitated by the smoke and the toxic off-gassing, carbon monoxide, and other things that are a result of combustion. Here's another one. Some of us remember, some of us don't. Take an extra credit card with you, maybe with extra cash. These days we tend not to use cash so much, but in some of these areas, that's all that the taxi driver is going to take is cash. And sometimes you need to be prepared with that. And another one to remember is photocopies of your essential documents, your passport or whatever else you're taking with your driver's license, perhaps, so that if you lose them, at least you're one step closer to getting a replacement. You're not starting from scratch when you go to the local consulate to then, get emergency travel papers. Here's another good one to remember, is put all your essential stuff in a little evacuation bag, we call it. Not just your documents, credit cards, but maybe your asthma pump or anything else that you can afford to lose everything else, including your cell phone. But what you can't afford to lose is your passport and essential medications that you might need. So if there's an issue, you grab hold of this, you head out of the boat or out of the hotel, and you've got the really essential stuff with you. And we will say this once, we will say this many times. Take with you the emergency numbers that you might need, the contact numbers that you might need. We'll go through this in our tool, but I just want to alert you to the fact that there might be a local EMS that is different to what you used to elsewhere. So 911 works in the US, it's other numbers in different countries. You might want the consular agent's number if you're going to a place where you know that there's no easy access to the consulate or to the embassy. Don't forget your travel agent's number or whoever booked the trip for you, because you might be in a position where they need to assist you remaking your bookings or help you out of a difficult situation. And yes, there is Dan. We are here to help you with your medical emergencies, give you advice. So by all means, have our number handy with you. We can do a lot for you, but we are not on site and we can't prepare your emergency plan for you. This is something you need to do. We are not your emergency action plan as much as you would like us to be. We cannot see where you are and what are the conditions where you are, although we will do our very best to assist you. Now, speaking of Dan, and speaking of emergency assistance that you might require, let's start by saying calling for help is not your emergency plan. It's a very important part of starting the emergency plan, but in itself, it's not going to assist you when help is not available to you. So a few of the things that you'll have with you, and I want to kind of highlight some of the shortcomings or things that they're not shortcomings with the insurance company, they're shortcomings with our understanding of what is available. And many of them are going to expect you to deal with the initial emergency yourself. Before you pick up the phone and say to your travel insurance company, I've got this issue, they're going to say, well, what is the issue? Have you gone to a hospital? What is it that you need us to do? And you need to take those first steps yourself. Yes, the dive operator, the dive professional, the hotel owner, the tour operator, they should be prepared. But they don't know everything about you. So they might have a standard way of dealing with things, but you might have travel insurance through another company. You might have dive insurance through another company. And it's not for them to have a whole long list of all those contact numbers and know how they all work. Then what can you expect from your insurance company when you call them? Yes, many of them have a hotline, but all they're going to do is advise you and tell you, yes, you need to get medical assistance, and off you go to wherever the nearest hospital is. They won't know where it is. That's going to be something you need to plan for. And at the end of all of this, insurance companies generally don't own hospitals or clinics or medical centers. Okay, so let's get that kind of in perspective. And when we go to some of these locations, they probably don't know. They know as much as you might know before you've been there. They don't own recompression chamber facilities. Now, that's not number one on your list, because some places you're going to go to, there's not going to be a recompression chamber. You want to be able to get medical help, and the medical people and perhaps the Divers Alert Network or an insurance company will then, let you know, yes, there is a chamber, there isn't a chamber, but your first step is medical assistance, not just going to the recompression chamber. More important to know where the hospital is than where the chamber is. Then be aware of EMS services. If you're going out on a boat somewhere, EMS can't get to you. You might think, well, the operator must take care of you, but it's going to take 2 or 3 days to steam back to port. And, that's not really going to help you if you're in an emergency. And speaking of that, your evacuation craft, whether it's a helicopter, fixed-wing aircraft, a boat, again, the insurance company might know how to activate those, but they don't own them. There is, sad to tell you, no damn helicopter, meaning no insurance company really has these craft. They don't own them. They perhaps know how to trigger them and get in touch with the assistance companies, but that's not something that they own. So it's something that has to be facilitated to take care of you. Then here's the one that I scratch my head around sometimes, and you get insurance and they say, no, we work on reimbursement. You pay for the things that you need to pay for, the hospital, the medications, the emergency services. Come back, present us with your bills, and we'll reimburse you. That's great. So we have the comfort that when we get home, the $100,000 that it now costs to get us to the nearest place of assistance, we can get our money back. I don't think so. I don't think that when the hospital or the evacuation company asks for a guarantee of payment from you and you flash your credit card, perhaps you have 100,000 on the credit card, perhaps like the rest of us, a lot less than that. So you need to know that the insurance company, if it works in reimbursement, you need to make other plans as to how will you be able to get assistance when it's beyond what you might carry with you. Okay, so that's kind of where the assistance companies fall in. We need them. They play a fundamental role, but they're not always on site, and they certainly don't always own the equipment or the evacuation services or the facilities, the healthcare facilities that you might need. Okay, so I've given you lots to think about in terms of the background and why we are concerned about this, and yes, how intricate and complicated these things might be. So let's render this down into a really basic plan that we can take you through, that you can jot it on a piece of paper. Just take something with you that when the proverbial trouble hits the fan, that you at least, and you're starting to panic, you whip out your piece of paper and you say, right, I've thought about this. Here are steps 1, 2, 3, 4. Instead of saying, well, what was I going to do? Who was I going to call? And we know that when things go wrong, most of us don't think in a kind of a logical way. So we've prepared an emergency action plan planning form for the industry. It's on our website. You can see the link at the bottom on the newdan.org website. You can navigate it from our opening page anyway. I'm going to take you through the step by step, just to explain what we mean with the terminology. But at the end of it, we're going to go through a real life situation to show you how we can actually complete this form. Okay, so we have an accident. And what do we mean by an accident? Well, something goes wrong, and as a result of something going wrong, which is an incident, we suffer from some form of irreversible damage. Something is broken and no longer usable, or we end up with an injury. But an accident really means that whatever has happened has resulted in loss of equipment, loss of your passport, or some form of injury. And so right at the top, we have 2 little bars. You'll click on one of those bars, whether it's a medical event or a non-medical event. You'll choose what it is. And the moment you do that, you will get a drop down. And you can scroll down that drop down and pick whatever the thing is that you're planning for. So diving illness, trauma, or any medical issue. And at the bottom of all these drop down boxes, we have somewhere where you can type in. If it's something that is not in the form, you can type in what your particular event might be. So we have medical events, and then we have non-medical events. And this is usually where the planning that we go through before our great dive trip is perhaps lacking. And, once you go through this process and once you click on these things, you will see that there's a lot more to it that can go wrong. Again, we're not planning on having things go wrong, but if we know what could go wrong, it makes it easier for us to then make sure they don't go wrong. So step number 2 is this really an emergency? Okay. What do we mean by an emergency? Well, the typical definition of an emergency for us is going to be where we can't control the situation or we can't contain the situation. You've got a loss of gas or whatever, and we basically, no matter what we shut off, it's not going to contain that gas or whatever the leak happens to be. Where we have a medical emergency that can't be stabilized. So if with our first aid kit or what's on board the boat, you can be stabilized, that's fine. They'll then get you back to shore and take care of you. where we need external assistance, and where time is critical. And that's probably the most important thing, because when time is critical, we tend not to then think logically. So just to kind of put this into context for how you will see it, if it's a clear emergency, then yes, it's an emergency. If you're not sure as to whether it's an emergency or not, default to yes. If it's no, that's fine. We have a little drop-down box there that you can select. I'm going to, apply first aid, or if it's some form of theft, this is the number I'm going to contact, and then we'll have things generally under control. And if you click no and it gets worse, then we need to have planned for the yes situation. So what are the kind of emergency actions that we can think of? And the first step we will go through is call for help. It's not your emergency action plan, but it's the first step in your emergency action plan. And these can vary depending on the site, depending on the location, depending on what you're doing. And again, we have the other box where you can then type in whatever emergency that you thought about, you've heard about, that might be unique to that specific area. Now, that's your first step. Call for help is your first step. Clearly, that's not all that you're going to do. And so there's a text box there. Everything that's in blue is where you can actually type in information. And so you'll go through step by step. What am I going to do? Who am I going to contact? Where can I get assistance? And you'll go through things step by step. And just thinking about this will prompt you to think a little further than pick up the phone and call someone. Okay, for this, we're going to need perhaps some form of emergency equipment, and we've divided this into two. So actual equipment, like your first aid kit or your cell phone or sat phone, and then what other supplies might you need, like copies of your documents or spare cash or your insurance cards that you know which number you're going to call. Not really important what's the most important, but you have space to actually fill that in on the text box that is provided for. Right. This part, you cannot underestimate the importance of it, and that is the emergency contacts, so that when something happens, we're prepared and we know who we're going to call, especially if it's a legal matter or a security matter. So you would go through this, and I would think that in most cases you'd need an answer for every one of these particular questions. So make sure that they're up-to-date contact details, make sure that they're going to work, and remember, if you have a plan for another vacation, that the contact numbers clearly are going to be site-specific, and you need to obviously record them on your form. And remember, if you use the same form to go to the same place 2 years later, it is possible that those numbers no longer exist. Okay, so we get to the next block that says, has the emergency been resolved, and has it been contained, and is it no longer an emergency? And if the answer is yes, well, if we're lucky and the damage wasn't too severe, we can continue with our trip. And if no, then we might need to make plans and then return home. But the emergency is now over, things are under control. We've got time to think about these things, and we can then essentially then move on with whatever we plan we're going to do. However, as usually happens, certainly medical emergencies, no. We've tried to stabilize things. We've got the person, to a point where we can get assistance. EMS has come, but it's still not resolved. And what we do now is we treat that as a new emergency, but we go to the next step in terms of what assistance we might need. And here we would look at things like evacuation. Okay, so they've stabilized you, it's not working, and now you need to be evacuated. And hopefully your insurance covers evacuation. Hopefully people can contact your insurance's evacuation assistance so that they can say, yes, you're covered for evacuation. So it's not just enough to take the insurance, but whoever's with you, and perhaps the boat organizers or the dive operator needs to have that information with them. And again, you've got place at the bottom to fill in your text. And I'd like to make you aware of this one over here where it says, no, you don't have insurance, or you have insufficient insurance. And I put it on this list for you to think about when you're planning, to prompt you to think, okay, in this particular event, my credit card insurance really is not going to be sufficient, and perhaps I really should consider some form of additional travel insurance. Okay, and again, you're going to select the first action that you're going to default onto, because it can obviously vary, but there's a text box there that you can then type in all the subsequent steps that you might need to take. So we've tried to make this tool as user-friendly as possible, as flexible as possible, and allow you to put in the things that would apply to you. you know where you're going to, you know what your assistance services are, and you, by thinking through these things, by following the prompts that are there, you'll be able to come up with your own plan. Okay, so I've given you lots of things to think about. Let's now pick a case, and let's actually do this in reality. And I have a friendly assistant here next to me that's actually going to do the typing for me. So let's go through this thing step by step. And let's pick the first one. It's going to be a medical emergency, perhaps. Okay, so here we'll have trauma, which might be what we select. But actually, before we get there, let me show you what other things can happen to you. So you get lost on land. You have a vehicle accident, theft, assault, aggression. We've tried to kind of prompt you as much as possible, but still there's a place at the bottom where you can then type in whatever else we haven't got on the list. But medical event, that's what we're going to use as our example. You might have fallen down the stairs. You might have some other trauma not related to the boat. So the boat operator or the dive organizer can't really assist us with that. We've got a place here to say when we actually put the plan in place to remind us. So it happens to be today. And we're going to be traveling to Bali. So let's just put in there, this is our emergency action plan for Bali. Now, on the left-hand side here, you can see a clear for button. And by clicking that, everything clears out in the entire form, except for the contact numbers, because yes, it's a pain to go back and recreate all those numbers. So we decided to leave that one as it was. Okay, so it's today's date, and this is our Bali emergency action plan. Great. So let's think, it's trauma. What is the first action we're going to need to take? And we don't really have a choice. We need to call for help. Okay, that's fine. So we've called for help. What are the next steps that we're going to do? And, EMS is probably who we're going to need to get hold of. And then obviously we're going to have to wait for them to arrive. And then if it's possible, you might need to call your insurance company. If it's a serious emergency, clearly you can't do that, but you'll hopefully have a buddy or somebody that can do that for you. Then this has now happened in the hotel, so you probably want to let the dive operator know that you won't be joining in the next day. Again, that might not be an emergency action, but remember, when things go wrong, we don't always think logically, and here's a great place for us to prompt what we need to do. And then the last thing, maybe you want to let your dive buddies know that you won't be joining them the next morning, sadly so. What do we need in terms of equipment for this? Well, most likely we're going to need a cell phone. And in terms of emergency supplies, nothing on here seems to make sense. Maybe my insurance card. What about some other form of identification so that when we are being taken away, we at least have something that can tell whoever we're with who we are, and then track back from that which hotel we're staying at, and so on. You can decide for yourself. You can even add something else in there that is applicable to this particular accident that you are thinking about, so that when it happens, you're prepared, but most of all, it's not going to happen because you have a plan in place. We know how these things work. When we have a plan in place, we have the umbrella with us, then it doesn't rain. Okay, so we're going to Bali. The dive center is not a local US number. Most cases, it's going to be in Bali. So we're going to type in the details for the dive center that happens to be a Bali number that we can maybe punch it into your cell phone so that it's a direct dial where you don't have to worry about the country code. Then probably the hotel, because we might need to call them. We've had a trauma event outside the hotel, and we need them to come and assist us. In this particular case, there is no number that we can call. We've decided on saving on budget, and we're going Airbnb, and we're on our own. Okay, no problem. Right, what is the local rescue service number in Bali? No, it's not 911. It's actually 118. That happens to be the number. Easy to look up before you go on your vacation. Same for the nearest hospital, which happens, like 911 here in the US. But here, the police is not the same. They have a different number. It happens to be 110 if you have a security issue, or you need somebody to come assist you. You've been assaulted. Heaven forbid that something happens that you can no longer control. Yes, you do need your insurance company's number, really, because if you're going to need some form of assistance, we need to check with them whether you're covered for that or not. So you bought your insurance in the US, so it's going to be a 919 number, and you just happen to have insurance with Dan, so you've got the Dan number handy for you there. Okay, where is the local embassy or consulate if you lose your papers? Well, on that island, there might be neither, but there's usually in some area, somewhere around there, going to be a consular agent. Great idea to have that number with you before you go. And you know, when you're planning for this, you're going with a dive operator, you're planning your trip, a lot of this information you can get directly from them. But this is your plan. This is going to be the piece of paper you will have with you. So you need to make sure that it's all filled in, and don't just rely on whoever booked the trip. Your travel agent, you probably want their number in case you have to make alternative travel arrangements. Maybe you have your dive insurance through them, so you need to have their number handy. And then who else? So a couple of things you might think about, but you know what? What if I'm the one injured and somebody else is taking care of me? Well, they're going to need to know, you know, who your bank is so they can actually get hold of money for you. You're not going to be the one that can do it, or you keep your bank number with you, and you know, hopefully you've spoken to them before so you can move some money from your savings account where it happens to be. But, you know, when we need money is the time that we realize, you know, this is a reimbursement only, you've got to pay, and then you're going to claim when you get back. So a couple of other things. If you might put in there your home number, because if something happens to you, you have an asthma attack, the best thing your buddy can do is then call home so that they can take further action and assist you in the emergency. So now we're ready, we've got the numbers, we've had an emergency, we can resolve the emergency, great. If it's minor damage, minor injury, maybe just our pride, then we can resume or we can return home. But heck no, we went to the local hospital, it's a significant trauma, and they're not really equipped for that, so we have an ongoing emergency. So in this particular case, we might need to know where is the advanced medical care facility. Okay, so what are the things that there's nothing you can do. You're going to go and have your advanced medical care, and hopefully when that's been stabilized, right, what do I do now? I better, you know, I'm going to be on this island for a little while longer, so I might need to contact the lodging to extend your checkout. That might be one thing you want to do. You might need to get hold of your consular agent to extend your visa, or the local immigration people, because very often we travel to places where we have a visa that's really limited to the time that we've booked for that trip. It's not always going to be, you know, right until you need to leave. Then perhaps your travel agent is going to have to rebook your flights. But you can see we're preparing ourselves. So when these things happen, it's not a question of, gosh, what do I need in first? I've made a plan, I've got the numbers, I know who I'm going to call. And then perhaps you need to contact your bank because you run out of money and you need money wired or money put into your credit card so that you can then deal with the bills that might arise out of that, or any other additional travel expenses and so on. So there we are, we filled in our form. We might have the same one for any medical emergency, which could very well be the case, or we might have one or two depending on whether you want for medical, or you might want to have one for a non-medical issue. You can decide. You go through these drop-down lists, we give you plenty of prompts that you can select from, and if nothing else, it'll help you to think about what could be an issue that you wouldn't have otherwise thought of. And once we've done all of this, we then go to print it out, and as you can see, when it's printed, it gets rid of all the blue, and it's a nice clear form. We can print it out, fold it up, put it in our travel documents, and we're good to go. Okay, so I hope that kind of gives you some indication of a way to prepare yourself. And remember, if you prepare for something, you're going to deal with it much better. And in fact, if you prepare for it, if you take your umbrella with you, it's not going to rain. Okay, now I'm hoping you to find this useful. If nothing else, go to our website, have a look at the form, see whether there's something useful you can use there, see if you know, it's a new area, you're not quite sure what you should think about, and you'll be far better prepared. And I hope I've covered kind of, you know, the background as well as how you would use this. So just a couple of last words from us here at DAM. So yes, the best protection comes from being prepared. That's an old adage that is used, but it's true. Do your homework before you go on your trip. You know, make sure that you understand what are the local conditions, whether it's security, whether it's, you know, whether there's good healthcare facilities available for you, whether, you know, you're really remote and it's a long way by car, by ambulance to where the nearest help is going to be. When I say select wisely, what I really mean is be careful as to who you choose to book through. If you're going through a travel agency, or do your homework online, read the reviews. You're going to dive at a dive center, or have a look. Maybe they've got a bunch of bad ratings because when something went wrong with a visitor there, they really were not prepared to deal with them, or didn't deal with them adequately. And clearly you want to know what's available in terms of healthcare, EMS, whatever else you might need. Some places we go to, and I'm going to be a little bit politically incorrect here, But some places we go to, you probably don't want to phone the police. You probably want to rather rely on the dive operator at the hotel to help you out of a particular situation. Okay, let's learn from history, because the one thing we do learn from history is that we don't learn from history, which is really silly. So think of the things that other people have experienced and just learn from that so that we don't make the same mistakes again. And then at the end of this, be realistic. No, you cannot foresee everything. You can't always see what's around the corner. You can't anticipate a tsunami when you're on vacation in Thailand, can we? And of course, you can only do so much. So you prepare and plan as best you can, but sometimes things go completely out of control. And then just generally be aware, make sure that you know what is there, what you can rely on. Really, what I want to say to you here is just don't take your health and safety for granted. Plan before the time. And if you do that, then generally you'll be aware of some of the security issues, perhaps, in some of these locations. You're fine as long as you stay in the tourist area, but you perhaps venture into another area where there's sights to see, but it's at night, and perhaps it's not going to be as safe as it should be. So I've taken you through what we are offering to you as a tool. We get calls here on our emergency hotline. It's actually a medical question rather than an emergency. And they ask us, I'm going to an area, what should I prepare for? What should my emergency plan be? We do get those from dive operators clearly that say, do we have a sample emergency action plan that we can get? And the answer is no. Each emergency is going to be different. And yes, we can rely on the dive operator. Yes, we can take legal action. Yes, we have insurance. But that doesn't always answer all the questions when something happens. So I want to finish off by thanking those of you that are our DAN members and our DAN members worldwide. We rely on you for your membership and your membership support. So not only financial support, but by attending our webinars and helping us and spreading the word, because we use what you give to us for our safety programs, for our prevention programs, for the research we do that gives the industry some indication of what are the common elements, what are the things that we could better understand, so that if we have an injury, it's easy to get down to the root of it. For our medical services, for our emergency hotline, which is actually available to everybody, but we fund that out of our membership dues. And then for our general education programs, whether they are presentations like this, or whether the first aid training that Dan offers. So we rely on you, and we want to thank you for your support. And collectively, the only way to make diving safe is to do it together. Now, we can sit here and give you all sorts of ideas, but you need to absorb those ideas, tell us if we're not being practical or realistic, and we will adjust and we will investigate those things and hopefully give you some better answers. And lastly, here's a good email address to get. It's on the website, but in case you want to jot it down now, send us your questions. We love answering your questions. Generally, we get really great answers back from you saying, thank you so much for your insights, for your information. We don't often get people writing back saying, gosh, you really don't know what you're talking about. So please feel free, no matter how simple the question might appear to you, reach out to us. We would love to hear from you. And with that, I'd like to hand it back to Brian. If you've got any questions you'd like to ask or comments you'd like to make, please, this is your open forum for you now to ask.
All right. Thank you, Francois, for a great presentation. And thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Saw some great comments in the thread. People tuning in from all over. We had a lot of local love right here in the North Carolina Triangle. So thanks to all you locals who turned in. And, of course, everyone from abroad, far and wide, from Texas to Tobago. So let's see some questions and comments that have come up in the chat. Somebody asked about coverage, and I see Josh, thanks Josh for running all the software for us this evening. Josh did provide some answers, some contact information about coverage. But one thing I did want to say is that DAN membership does provide an evacuation benefit. So if you are interested in learning more about that, you can go to dan.org and look into membership and see what our membership, what sort of evacuation coverage. That's going to vary, either $150,000 or $100,000 evacuation benefit, depending on the state of residence. All right, getting into some other comments. I really liked what Francois was saying at the end about how it's our responsibility to kind of, you know, take our own safety, take it in our own hands. And there's a comment in the thread. Someone said, when we plan a trip, I ask the dive operator if they have an emergency response plan in advance and if they might like to share it with the group. I think that's fantastic. That is absolutely the sort of thing that we want to encourage divers to do. And what that does is it alerts dive operators that the divers, their customers, are thinking about their safety and are prioritizing their safety. And it really helps further and advance this conversation and this culture of safety in diving. Francois, any comments from you on that topic?
No, I think that's a great comment that the person made, and shows that one is thinking ahead, and that's a great way to start your thinking about your planning for if things go wrong, because out of that, you might need to change your insurance. You might understand that your insurance has certain shortcomings. They might exclude certain things that are going to apply to you in that particular area. So I commend them. I certainly commend dive operators that have that information that they can share with their customers. And I would certainly feel very comfortable if I, was going on a vacation. I reached out to the liverboard and they say, look, your health is our concern, and this is what we have in place. And all we really need for you to do is bring your own medications. We have everything else in place. And that gives you a great deal of comfort, because it not only means they have a plan, but it means that it's in their minds and they are ready to carry it out. So a great comment.
Absolutely. And it's not always comfortable or easy to advocate for your own safety, to call a dive operator and ask them to see if you can come by and learn a little bit more about their safety protocols, or take a look at their compressor room, or take a look in the oxygen cylinder on the dive boat that you've just boarded. Some of these things are socially awkward, but learning to practicing getting past that, breaking down that social barrier, and really advocating for your own safety is an important skill, I think, for divers to develop. Right. Yes, and in case you didn't see it in the chat, the email address to contact Francois is riskmitigation@dan.org, and we would love to hear from you. Unless there are any additional questions, I think we'll wrap it up. So, Francois, any final words from you?
No, I think, Brian, probably the most important message I want to give out there is, we've given some examples of things that can go wrong. We know each one of these incidents or accidents has befallen maybe someone we know, something we've read about in, some of the dive blogs that we get, maybe in the Alert Diver, other diver magazines. So things do go wrong, sadly so. But if we're prepared for them, we can certainly minimize or do great amount of damage control, so that we don't end up in a situation where we are really badly injured, or it's very difficult to get out of you get locked up in some countries. It's tough. Your lawyer back home has really got no ability to help you there. So, a local lawyer's number, or just ask the dive operator. Many of the questions that, or the points that we prompt in that spreadsheet, or in that emergency action planning diagram that we worked through, let them be the prompts for you to use to ask the dive operator or to the hotel. So, some of them you think, well, I can't really have a plan for this. I've got all the contact numbers I need. But hey, Mr. Dive Operator, what do you do in these events? And that will instill a lot of confidence in you. But what we're hoping to do is that we've raised those questions, made you aware of them. You can jot them down, and when you're communicating with your dive operator, the liverboard, the hotel, whoever you are, booking through, that you know what to ask. And then it becomes less socially awkward. If you communicate with them right up front before you actually leave. So thanks, Brian. Thank you for the comments.
Great. And thank you again, everyone, for tuning in. Let's see. We checked out an AED once. There's a comment on a liveaboard, and it had no battery. So that is a perfect illustration of why we do this sort of thing, why we advocate for you to advocate for yourselves. So that is a pretty surprising oversight that perhaps isn't as surprising as it should be. So that's certainly a good anecdote as to why we why we recommend this sort of thing. So to wrap this up, we thank you all again for attending. We are excited to be bringing you more and more webinars. We will be doing them at least monthly. The next one is scheduled for February 18th. To keep your eyes out for emails, e-newsletters from Dan. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We will keep bringing you great safety information, and thanks for joining us. Have a good night.
Thank you.